Ring a rosy, as the light declines, I remember Dublin city in the
In the
rare
rare old times.
There are a few species as enigmatic or that capture our hearts and imaginations as the owl. This week, we're going to take you on a trip through the rare owl times. Welcome back to another episode of Two in the Hand, folks. I'm going to begin by apologizing. We promised there'd be less singing, but we couldn't just stick to it. Anytime there's a microphone in front of that Phillips fella, he's going to sing. And the rare owl times and the fact that we're talking about owls this week, the punnage was just too much for him and we had to let him sing because he would have given out for the rest of the episode, and that's it. Before we get into what we're going to talk about, which is owls, I just want to say thank you for the response to last week's videos. We were blown away by them. We didn't expect it. It was fantastic, and long may it continue. And we really, really appreciate those of you who have subscribed, and those of you who have liked and shared the video, and those of you who commented. I'd also like to thank the guys who recommended the Jewel Hunter. Steve and Aidan are the only two that I can think of right now. I'm sorry, guys, but it's here, and I've read the first 3 pages, and I'm hooked. I think it's great. So I'll read it and I'll lend it to Brian and the lads then afterwards. But I think this is as good a proof as any that we actually listen to and read your comments, and we appreciate them and value your opinion as well. So as I said, this week we're talking about owls. Now we're going to begin by looking at Ireland's probably most common owl, which is the long-eared owl. And we're very, very lucky to have someone in our midst right now who has a really, really high level of first-hand experience in taking care of this particular species. And that's our own Brian McPhillips. No, it's not. Brian.
Yeah, that's what I was waiting for.
Brian can hardly take care of himself. It's our own Peter Phillips. Peter has quite recently hand-reared two owl chicks, and he's going to fill us in a little bit on his experience and what he thought about the process. And for that, I'd like Peter to kind of tell us a little bit about how he got his owls and a little bit of background there, okay?
Yeah, so earlier on in the spring, long-eared owls, they're a species that, as John alluded to, they're common enough, but people rarely see them. It's a bit like the Harry Potter story. You don't see long-eared owls from one end of the year to the next. And then in springtime, when the chicks are born and they appear in trees, all of a sudden, people are seeing them all over the country. And during lockdown I got a phone call from Breffney Martin from the Loud Nature Trust to say that someone who lived near me had found a long-eared owl in his garden, a baby. And what had happened was, I don't know if you remember, there was a big storm, I think it was in early May, and the conifer trees in the man's garden had blown down. And when he went out one morning, he saw this fluffy little owl chick sitting on the tree that had fallen down. And he rang Breffney to tell him. So Breffney's suggestion was, which is the right thing to do, leave the baby owl there, because the parents will still come back and feed it, because the owl was big enough to leave the nest. They leave the nest at quite an early age, and they move around the tree until they're fully fledged. And this little fellow was a couple of weeks old, so he was able to keep himself warm. But when the man went out to check on the owl, he realised that its brothers and sisters had been eaten. There were some feathers left on the ground, so he was the only one there. So we still thought it was a good idea for him to put it up in a tree close by, and the parents would come back to feed it. But he was too worried. He didn't want that. He didn't want the death of the owl on his conscience. So he asked us to come and take it. So he literally lives 3 or 4 minutes from my house. So myself and my daughter Rose went out and met him, and we took the owl home. Now I've never hand-reared an owl before, so it was a real learning experience for me and the family. Now when we took it in, we had no aviary or anything like that. It came in a little pet carrier box, and we had to scramble quick because we had to try and find food for it to eat. So we went to one of the local pet shops, bought some frozen food, and I suppose that's where our journey started with Vincent, the long-eared owl.
See, Peter, that's not what I heard. See, Brian told me you actually were cutting down trees in your garden because you kept hearing this squeaky noise come from them. And you're like, I need to get to sleep here. And you didn't realize what was making the noise and you just cut it down. That's what Brian told me happened. So obviously I need to verify my sources a little bit better because that's good old fake news. McCluskey strikes again. But so that's how you ended up with Vincent. How did you end up with aisle number 2?
Yeah, so we have this thing on Facebook called the Nature Detectives, myself and the kids, and it's trying to teach people about biodiversity and exploring nature in the garden. So we decided, while we were doing that, why wouldn't we put Vincent's story online and just show people a little bit about Vincent? So we had the story up online, and a friend of mine I know who used to work in the zoo, she runs the Hedgehog Rescue Dublin, and she saw the post. And she goes out rescuing hedgehogs and other animals from people's gardens and the roadside. And she sent me a message to say that she had recently got a phone call from Skerries to say, which is a town in County Dublin, to say that someone had found an owl in the middle of a housing estate. So she drove down with a pet carrier and she collected the owl. And she took a few photographs and she sent them to me, and she was asking, did I know what species it was? And I said, I don't believe it. I said, it's long-eared owl. And I knew from the photos it looked a bit bigger than Vincent. It looked to be maybe a week or 2 older. So I said, look, I'm rearing this Vincent to release him back into the wild. They don't do too well on their own, apparently, because they'll imprint on humans. So it's better if they're in more of like a crash environment where there's 2 or 3 chicks together, so they recognize each other as owls. So I said to her, I said, Yvonne, look, if you like, I'll take your owl and I'll rear them together, because the plan is to release Vincent back into the wild. So she said, oh, that's great. You'd be doing me a big favor. So I went and I met Yvonne, collected Oscar. We were a little bit worried at the time because Oscar was quite big. Oscar was a week or 2 older than Vincent, and I was sure he was going to kill him. He was much bigger. But as it turned out, when we put the 2 of them together, it was actually Vincent was the big brave one, and Oscar was the kind of scaredy cat. Oscar used to hide behind Vincent in the aviary. So when we went up to feed them or do anything in the aviary, Oscar would be hiding behind Vincent, and Vincent would be the one who'd always be sitting out front and center.
That's crazy. That's crazy. You mentioned there.
Yeah, where were you looking after them, Peter?
Yeah.
So we live out in the countryside. We have a fairly big garden, so we have a balcony on the bedroom. So we decided we'd build an aviary onto the balcony of the bedroom. So it's probably about 10 foot long and maybe about 8 foot high. So and it's on the second floor. So the plan was to put them into the aviary. So I work in the zoo, so I have a lot of experience with birds. So we decked out the aviary like a proper owl aviary. It was covered in conifer branches, so it felt like home for the owls, and we had a little secure nest site for them and some perches high up. So it gave them a really good view kind of around the garden. But it also meant it was really easy for us we just had to open the bedroom door to go out into the aviary to feed them or clean them. So it was good for us, and it was great for the owls as well.
When we mentioned feeding them and cleaning them there, Peter, what did the actual care entail?
So they're fairly easy to look after because they weren't really small chicks. So Vincent was like a couple of weeks old already. So when we took him in, the main concern was that would he take mice off us? Because obviously he was at an age where he bonded with his parents, so he didn't see himself as a human. But at the same time, we had to feed him, so we had to make sure he actually took the mouse, because he would have been getting fed by his parents. So obviously when we turned up with a mouse and he's looking at us and he's looking at the mouse, he's going, I'm not going to eat that. So you have to kind of, the first thing we have to do is, so we bought some frozen mice in the pet shop that you'd feed to snakes or lizards, kind of not warm them up, but make sure that they were defrosted properly, dampen it down, and then actually you have to hold the owl and kind of have a little video. I'll show you the video, but you have to kind of put the mouse into the owl's beak.
A little bit of sriracha just beforehand, keep it fresh.
And then kind of stand back and fingers crossed, hopefully swallowed it. So once you started eating, which you did straight away, that was the kind of first big hurdle over.
Very, very good. That's crazy. And did they involve much cleaning, Peter? Was there?
They don't, because birds of prey, once a day, like, is all you need to feed them a small amount. You don't do a huge amount of poo either. They seem to be very good at using up the food that they're given. They're not very messy. They eat it whole, and then they do a bit of poop, but it's a bit like seagull poop, or it's not particularly bad. And because we had an aviary built and it was all outside, there was no smell. I mean, initially when he came, he was in a pet carrier for a few days. My brother came and actually built the aviary, so it took a couple of days. So he was, we used to keep Vincent in the walk-in wardrobe, but after a day or two, he actually learned how to escape from the box. And when you'd open the walk-in wardrobe, he'd be sitting on my trousers in the on the trouser rail. So you'd open the door and he'd be sitting there on top of a pair of trousers, and he made some mess, I'll tell you.
I'd imagine so. And I have to ask, how did the good lady react to having her firstly her walk-in wardrobe and then her balcony destroyed? And let's just call it owl muck.
In fairness, she took it very well. I think partly because it was lockdown and it was just one of those experiences, you kind of just said, look, we'll just throw ourselves into this, let's go with it, and we'll see where it takes us. And it was just an amazing experience. But when Oscar came, then it was no extra work really at all. I mean, because you have to clean one owl, you may as well be cleaning two.
And like, to me, Peter, that seems to be quite, I suppose, an intense process. Okay, and it seems to me that you would be sort of around the owls quite a lot. Do they ever sort of become like a domestic animal? Do they become like a pet at any point? Do you ever get to that level of familiarity with them? And do they ever get to that level of familiarity with you? Or is it always that kind of initial wild animal standoffy type thing?
Yeah, I mean, look, if we had have made pets out of them at an early stage, you could have done that and kind of tamed them. But you'd be doing them a disservice, because when they're being reintroduced back into the wild, you don't want them habituated to humans. You want them kind of wary of people. You want, so when they leave, that they're not kind of trying to hang around people looking for food. So although it sounds like we were kind of cozy with them, we weren't really. We fed them and we put them out in the aviary, and for 4 or 5 hours a day, like, there'd be nobody near him. Like, we'd have the curtains closed so he couldn't see us. And we were lucky because we only had him in the aviary like a few days when we got Oscar at the second hour. So once the two of them together, they kind of buddied up fairly quick. And in fact, even shortly before we were releasing them, they were quite nervous of us. They'd be hissing. So as soon as you open the aviary door, they'd be hissing, giving out to you, which is what you want from an animal that's been reintroduced back into the wild. You don't want something that's kind of, flying down towards you, looking for a scratch in the ear. You want something that's up at the back of the aviary, hissing away, looking to get away from you. And we were lucky enough that because we had the two of them, that it worked out that way.
Did they call much at night?
At the start, now you often hear people saying about them, they make a call like a squeaky gate. They only called when they were hungry. So Vincent, the first 2 nights he was there, he called, and it was kind of your heart to go out to him, because he was he was only the size of your fist, and we could see him out the bedroom window sitting on the perch and out this little ball of fluff, it was like a grey tennis ball with claws, basically sitting there, and you just heard this squeaky call, and it was really kind of sad, because you think, God, he's looking for his parents. He's really sad. But in fact, they only called when they were hungry. So only for the first night they were there, and so we didn't feed them at night time. So you think like they're very active in the evening, and but we used to feed them during the day before, if you like, we went to bed. So then they weren't calm at night time. They were fine. So we fed them at night before we went to bed, and we fed them in the morning again. So they never cried at night time once they were fed. They weren't hungry.
Very cool. You kind of mentioned early on, Peter, that you hadn't ever done this before, but from working in the zoo and being from your background, has your experience in that regard helped you?
Oh yeah, big time. I mean, just even being around animals and knowing how to handle them and behave around them made a big difference, because I've got 3 small kids and they just wanted to turn them into pets. They just wanted to. They thought they were all in a Harry Potter movie. They wanted the owl on their arm, but I had to kind of tell them that wasn't the way we were going to do it, because they were wild animals. They needed to go back to the wild, so it was important we kept them, cautious people.
I was waiting for, when you said I have 3 small kids, I was waiting for, it's no different. You have to keep them at
That's
arm's
what I
length.
thought he was going to say too. Yeah.
That's where I thought it was going. I was like, Jesus, Peter. So how long did the overall kind of rehab process take?
So it took, let me see, I think we got them in early May and we let them go in early July. So we had them for probably 2 months. I think we worked it out that about 60 days old was when they should be released. Now, between the jigs and the reels, we have to wait a few days, but we released them in early July. And, one of the things, they're hard to release. They don't survive very well from captivity. So for barn owls, for instance, apparently, like if you keep a young barn owl in a barn, and then you encourage maybe rats or mice to come in, and they come down and take the food, they start hunting for themselves, and then you eventually open the door and you let the owl in and out. That has worked for barn owls. But long-eared owls leave the nest when they're quite young, so they tend to move around a quite large area, and then the parents feed them. But there was a study done in Italy where they'd radio tracked 8 long-eared owl chicks from a rehab place, and only one survived, I think, past something like 60 days. The other 7 died. Were all found dead. So there was a very high mortality. Now there could be different reasons for that, but we were determined that we were going to give them the best chance possible. So we kept them that little bit longer, and I think that kind of paid dividends, because once we knew they could hunt food for themselves, because obviously if you're kept in captivity and we were feeding them dead animals. So, and like the mice and the chicks, we were feeding them are white and yellow, whereas a lot of the food that comes from the wild is obviously brown and black. So then we had to source brown and black mice to make sure that they were the right color, because obviously when they're going to be hunting in the wild, that's the kind of food they're going to be hunting. There's no point in them looking for white mouse or a yellow chick. They're just not going to find them, and they'd starve to death. So we had to kind of source that kind of food to make sure that they were able to hunt themselves.
That's cool. That's really cool. I never would have thought of that, Peter. I've heard with this, typically not juvenile birds of prey, but birds of prey themselves, that when you're rehabilitating them, it's kind of best practice to get them to a certain weight, to a healthy weight, before you release them. Was that in your mind at all? Did you consider that?
Yeah, it was. We got some bird ringers out to ring them, and that was the first time they'd been weighed, because we didn't do much handling of the birds at all. So that was one concern. We were concerned about the weight, but as it turned out, the weights of the 2 owls were perfect for release. So we were delighted about that we got that right without even trying too hard. So we did get them ringed before they were released, which was great. Now we haven't, when we did open the aviary and we let them out, I think it was Vincent left first, and he flew off, and poor Oscar kind of stayed in. He stayed in for another night, and then she flew off. Now we thought actually from the ringing that there's a possibility that they were a pair. It looked like they're quite difficult to tell apart, the males and females, but it looked like they were a pair from the biometrics. So we're hopeful that they hang around. Now we haven't seen them in the garden since, but one of our neighbours saw one a few weeks ago, which was very encouraging.
Awesome.
Peter, I can't remember. Do you remember when I saw them? You could tell like the nose kind of feathering was like white on the female, was it, and dark on the male, or have I that mixed up?
Yeah, I think it's the other way around. I think the face, the nose feathering is darker on the females. It's a darker grey.
Oh yeah.
And the male's slightly whiter looking. I think
Is that a feature, or is that just a feature in how to sex them, or was that just those two individuals?
No, I think that is a feature, but it's a bit subjective. I don't think it's something you could. I think if you have a few, you can compare them. If you follow me, so there's probably a bit of a cline across the, from the males tend to be whiter and the females tend to be grayer. But it's just one of the clues you can use for sexing them. But I don't think it's an absolute definitive.
Robust, yeah.
That to me sounds like an incredibly involved process, Peter. I know you're saying it's best not for the owls to get attached to you, but did you get attached to them? And overall, did you think it was like how would you sum up that experience? Yeah,
you do get attached to them, but I suppose like I'm working in the zoo 30 years, you have to kind of separate yourself from the animals in your care, because you never know what's going to happen to them. You never know if it's going to be a good end or a bad ending. So you have to always kind of, they're not like, the way I kind of describe it, it's a little bit like looking after somebody else's pets when they're on holidays. You're not keeping them forever. They're always going back.
That poor Oscar's parents weren't on holidays.
God love them. They were crushed on that tree you cut down.
But having said that, now it was a really worthwhile experience. I mean, I don't know whether I do it again, but because it's quite intensive, and you have to be there every day for the 6 or 8 weeks. Like you can't go on holidays. Like
that was my next question. Did you take the aviary down?
The aviary's been taken down, yeah. So it's it was ruining the view, John.
That's it. Yeah, when you walked out in your towel in the mornings with your morning coffee, surveying the land, I'd say that the wire mesh was putting you off a bit, was it?
Well, I was lying in bed one morning with the owls there, and I pulled the covers back from my feet. Now I hated that, and I was wiggling my toe, and I could see actually Vincent was he's having a look to see was it something he could have a nibble on.
I'm just going to leave that there, Peter. I'm not going to comment on that at all, buddy. All I'll say is that Peter actually, for folks, for the audience at home there, Peter was fantastic in that he kind of let us go and see the owls and stuff and get great views, and to see them that close is unbelievable, and we're very grateful for you for that, Peter. He even kind of arranged access for a friend of mine and their kids, which was super sound, very, very soundy, and a lot of people wouldn't have done that. But one
that's
thing
the first time Peter's ever been sound. No.
I know.
Actually,
come on.
no, the day I went,
was that time in '93, Brian? Come on, don't be like that.
The day I went to see them, there was a green sand on the pool in his garden as well.
No way.
That's right. Yeah, that was a good day.
That was a very good day. I was just going to say, if you can, I know it's very hard to kind of replicate that type of experience, but if you can, folks, get a chance to see owls, long-eared owls in this case, up close, it is a very, very different experience to seeing them hunting at a distance. It's really, really cool is all I'd say. I'll roll in some footage of one time I was lucky enough to encounter a wild owl in my locality. Again, this was a chick that was recently fledged. As you can see from the clip, called from a branch directly above my head. I'd spent maybe an hour or two just kind of skulking underneath the place where I knew there was a nest. I knew there was a nest there because a friend of mine who birds in the locality, Jerry, told me it was there, and went out and scoped it out. Lucky enough to get the chick to pop out. But that type of experience is something I'd really, really recommend. And one of the ways that you can do that, of course, best practice, keep the owls' welfare in mind and all those different things. But one of the ways you can do that is you can listen out come spring for the telltale call. And it's magical for me. Owls would probably be my favorite species of bird. And seeing long ears like that is just fantastic. So if you get a chance to, guys, I would highly, highly recommend it. That's kind of Peter, you've talked enough for this evening. All right, we're moving on.
Moving swiftly on. Yeah.
No, we're going to move away from long-eareds now, and we're going to kind of move on to the twitching side of things, and we're going to start to discuss rare owls. Now, for our UK viewers, you may not be aware that we don't have the range of owl species that you guys have even breeding, or that you get as rare birds on passage. So what I mean by that is we don't have things like tawny owl, we don't have things like little owl. The species of owl that we're likely to get in Ireland really are just your long-eared owl and your short-eared owl in the winter. Both of which are kind of hard to connect with. They're not something that I would say very many birders in the country see on a weekly basis. I could be completely wrong with that, but that'd be my opinion. And then in terms of rare birds,
well, barn owl as well.
Brian, barn owl. I did forget about barn owls. So yeah, our breeding owls would be long-eared owl and barn owl. Barn owl much reduced. They're not as prevalent as long-eared owl, but they're doing okay in southern parts of the country and in some areas in the north. Short-eared owl in the winter, if we're lucky. There are some good roosts about it at the minute. I heard a report of 15 in Dublin, which is insane. Yeah, fair play.
Yeah.
But then rare owls, we're talking about things like snowy owl or scops owl. Anything else? There have been a couple of reports. There's been one in particular of a tawny owl that showed up and flew into a castle, stayed there because it was wet outside. So any other reports have been kind of deemed questionable. But those are the owls we're going to discuss moving forward.
I think there's one other owl that nearly made it onto the Irish list was hawk owl, because I think there was one that came on board a ship in a couple of 100 kilometers off the west coast of Ireland. Wow. I can't remember what year, but it's a long, long time ago. But that was probably our best chance to get one. I think it could have been I think people were saying it could be an American subspecies or something. I can't remember. But
wow,
hawk owl is a possibility of us getting it, but probably other than that.
Wow,
we probably miss our chance of that.
Little owl, I think there could be 4 Irish records.
There's 4 records, but
yeah.
Poo. No, I don't know. Yeah, there's 4 accepted records, but I think very little is known about them. I think there was one in 1981 or something, but I remember discussing it with a couple of lads before, and I don't know. It's one. It's hard to know what little owl.
It was poo-pooed, shall we say? It was poo-pooed.
Yeah, because there was one. There's been one recently reported, I think, in South County Dublin.
Yeah,
I suppose got the twitchers are twitching. Now I happen to know somebody who keeps little owl. He lives in Finglas, and I was asking him about that bird in South County Dublin, and he thinks he might know the owner of.
No way.
Yeah.
There you go. That's actually one issue that I suppose, but you could make the argument with a lot of rare birds of prey, but the fact that people do own them as pets can be an issue in terms of I suppose whether or not they're legitimate rare birds or they've kind of just walked out of the garden shed 2 gardens over or something like. But yeah, so do you want to talk about when you're first seeing a short-eared owl, Peter? I think you have a fucking fantastic story about.
Oh yeah. That's
I think you do, buddy. I'll tell you what. You spend the next minute or two kind of laying it all out in your head, how you can tell it in a politically correct way. And I'll tell people how I saw my first short-eared owl. My first short-eared owl was in County Louth, and it was on a Birdwatch Ireland trip. We were all looking at Sanderling, and a guy drove past in a car and goes, "I think there's an owl in a field up there." And we, of course, dismissed him out of hand. It was like, no, it can't be. It must be a buzzard or something. We poo-pooed it. But myself and another girl decided we'd take a walk up and see what the story was. And we looked in, and 35 feet from us, there was a short-eared owl day roosting just in a little hedge.
Class.
We let a roar out of us. We got all the lads racing up the road. We got crippling views of it. And to be honest with you, I've never had as good a view of a short-eared since. Been lucky enough to find 1 or 2. Had one coming in off the sea in Wexford, and another one in somewhere else in North County.
We saw one in Loher Sound together.
Well, yeah, good man. Yeah, couldn't remember that. But yeah, so that's how I saw my first. What about yours, Brian?
I think mine was the 27th of November 2010, so it's almost exactly 10 years ago. And it was at Seabank in County Louth, which is just outside Dundalk. And me and Dad were just driving down middle of the day, and across the road, short-eared owl, and it ended up hunting for, I think it's probably an hour and a half over the marsh, giving unbelievable views, yeah. And it'd disappear every couple of minutes, and then it'd just come back up again. It was just unreal to watch.
I believe there's one actually there at the minute, or a couple of weeks ago.
There is between Lurgan Green and Seabank. It's actually quite a good place for them. There's been a few. It probably gets one maybe annually. So, but that was an unreal buzz. Like when you see your first anything, it's an unreal buzz. But a short-eared owl, it was just amazing. Like,
yeah, I agree. Your first owls are awesome.
It's a long time since my first short-eared owl. I used to live in a place called Baldoyle in North County Dublin, and it was famous for short-eared owl. We used to have regularly 6 or 7 in some winters. So it was one of the species, if you like, that was well known for my locality. But I remember talking about owls and poo-pooing records. I remember I was walking through the fields one day, and in the middle of the stubble field, I spotted from behind a hedge, I spotted what looked like a short-eared owl right in the middle of the stubble field, and I thought, wow, that's a really unusual place for a short-eared owl to be. So I kind of crept along the edge of the hedge, and I was getting closer and closer. I thought, well, I can't believe it's
not flushing.
I can't believe it's not budging, like it's still sitting there, and no sign of it budging. So I crept along the hedge and lifted the bins. And boy, was I surprised at what I saw. So what I took to be, a short-eared owl, and the camouflage and the brown and the grey, was in fact a man sitting down in the middle of the field having a poo. Literally, my owl was literally poo-pooed in front of my eyes.
Peter, I'm not gonna lie. People would want to ask quite a lot of different questions about that story, but I want to know what that particular man did in his life to deserve to have his private moments disrupted by you creeping along a fucking hedge with your binoculars. What could he have possibly done in his life to deserve that particular experience? And then the second question is, what did you do? What did he see you? Did you wait there till he finished? What happened next? Like
he had one of those big kind of brownie trench coats on, and it was kind of thrown up over the back of his head. Obviously, he didn't want to get his coat spoiled. But well, as soon as I kind of realized what it was I was looking at, I just slunk back behind the hedge.
And the tour you were leading at the time, did any of them mind, or what happened? No, and seriously, buddy, when did you see your real first one?
My real first one was actually in Baldoyle.
Cool.
So yeah, we were lucky enough to find my own first short-eared owl, which was nice.
Deadly. I suppose from short-eared owl, guys, we have to move on to the next rare bird. I'm fairly sure we've all seen this. It was a snowy owl.
No, not
Peter,
me.
You need that, do you?
I've dipped a couple. I can tell you a little bit of a side story. Myself and Ger went to was it in Galway? Was it in Galway?
You're not allowed in Galway. Sorry, go ahead there, Peter. What are you saying?
I think it was Galway.
That's where I ticked one in Spiddle. Yeah.
Was it Spiddle? And was there some deranged local? Local?
No. That was Tarman Hill.
Oh, Mayo. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah.
So it's easy to get your deranged locals mixed up, though. So keep going.
So myself and Ger went up to Tarman Hill. The bird had been seen on and off for a few weeks, and as we were approaching the site, Ger informs me that one of the locals had taken a dislike. Who could ever take a dislike to twitchers from outside the county? But anyway, this local had taken a dislike to birders from outside the county and had this habit of arriving on site with a double-barrel shotgun, threatening people.
Yeah.
So myself and Jer went up onto the hill, and we were literally trying to keep one eye on where the owl might turn up, and the other eye on where the range local was going to turn up. But anyway, in the end, we dipped it. Thank God we dipped him as well, the range local. But
I know a couple of lads who twitched that, and they had a shotgun pointed in their face.
I believe it was Ian and Rob, and they were terrified. God loved them. Yeah, yeah. Although I know God loved them, but I would have paid good money to see that. Really would. Funny to see that. Yeah. So you look. Make a long story short, folks. That's where I saw my first snowy as well. So we'll go away and come back. Brian, tell your story. Where did you see your first snowy owl?
My first snowy owl, Peter, I saw it first time in Spiddle, which is near Connemara in Galway. And the views it was distant enough. Like we got, well, not close, but like the views were fairly decent of it, like scope views, and I got a couple of shots of it. So, but it did very little. It just like sat there the entire time, just turned ahead. We didn't see it fly or anything like that.
Did you not flush it blind now for a better view?
Yeah.
No, Peter, I would never do that.
That's the first time you haven't done that. That's the first time. That's crazy.
Yeah, no, but I'd like to actually see another one, maybe like a really close kind of snowy owls. Yeah. Maybe even see it fly.
Get one of your famous bird flying away pictures.
Yeah. Never to be seen again.
Never to be seen again. Yeah, so that I folks, I actually got my first snowy owl, first and only, I will say. There's background to that. So where I live, my local patch is an area called Slieve Bay, and it is it's I've talked about it before, but it's a bog essentially. It's got some sitka spruce planted up there, but it's really kind of an SPA. It's an area of special conservation or protection, whatever it is. But it's lovely. It's great for hen harrier, etc., so on and so forth. But pretty much the year I started birding, snowy owl turned up on a lake in the middle of my local patch, like where I spend 12 hours every weekend, or where I was at that point anyway. And bird was giving itself up. One of the guys we know, Aidan Kelly, actually got fantastic frame filling shots of it.
It's one of the best shots of the snowy owl, and then a male hen harrier flying over it.
Oh, they're fantastic.
Unreal, yeah.
Honest to God, absolutely crippling shots. But source point, I didn't get told about it, basically. Nobody told me.
John wasn't in the know. No.
Wasn't in the know at that point.
Neither was I.
And I didn't hear about it. Brian didn't hear about it either, and I didn't hear about it. And I assume that's down to the fact that it was in such a sensitive area for hen harrier breeding or whatever it is. No, I didn't hear about it anyway. That's the long and short of it. It was probably because I was just starting out or whatever. But I was really gutted about that, because it was one of my favorite birds ever. A huge Harry Potter fan. Hedwig's the dream bird, essentially. And it was on my doorstep. Didn't get
what
it.
A nerd. No.
I was going to say say it to my face, but say it to my upper chest. Yeah. Anyway, sorry, go ahead. So basically that was kind of in my first maybe year to 18 months of birding, and I had to wait another year until another one turned up in the country. I remember quite well because it was early in the week that I heard about it. Say the news broke on a Monday or Tuesday, and I couldn't get away until the Saturday morning. So I had to wait, and it was at Tarman Hill, way over on the Mulla Peninsula in the west of the country. It's like 4 hours from me. So news went out Monday or Tuesday, and then it hadn't been seen all the way up to that. But I said, look, promise myself I'd go for this bird. It's at the time was the only bird I wanted to see. So we left it, like when I say we, my dad and my girlfriend Vanessa. She was my girlfriend at that time. I can say that, not get in trouble. It's fiance now. So bundled everybody into the car, hit the road, and we arrived there at first light. And I think the first thing that needs to be mentioned is that the greatest case of mistaken identification took place in history. My dad, Puddin's Michael Cusack, mistook a lighthouse for a snowy owl and argued with me that it was a snowy owl. Look, it's rotating its head. No, it's fucking not that. Right? Look again, all right? Just look again. But yeah, he mistook a lighthouse. He'd probably kill me for saying that, but he did. And then we there's kind of like a
John, I can see where you got your birding skills from.
No need for that. Yeah, well, hold on. I actually got the bird, Peter, but all right. So I decided, I said, look, we'll give it another half an hour or so. And we walked kind of down the peninsula a little bit, and I just saw this white mound, and I was like, that's it. 100% sure that's it. Walked up to within 30 feet of the bird, sat down, viewed it for 5 to 10 minutes, and then it just decided to get up, and it flew kind of around us. I got some shots in flight. The thing that shocked me was that just how big a bird this is. Like, people always say owls are deceptive, they're smaller. Snowy owl is huge. It's got legs on it like an eagle. They're just incredible birds, and that's how I saw my first one. I'll never forget it. Now, one of my favorite twitching moments. Like, it was just an epic bird. If you haven't seen one, folks, try your best to. It's one you'll not regret. What have we left to talk about, boys? Barneys.
Scops owl.
I didn't ask you when you saw your first barn owl, lads.
Oh yeah, fair, yeah.
I actually, where I was from, Baldoyle, I remember 5 chicks one summer on top of a house quite close to me, and the adults coming in feeding them. And that was literally across from my house. So they were common then, though. They were, every bit of farmland had barn owls.
Wow. Serious decline. Actually, that's a serious decline. Brian and I struggled quite a bit to see them. When did you get your first one, Brian?
It was December 2010, so it was probably just after. No, sorry, it was January 2010. It would have been before the short-eared, and
okay.
yeah, it just completely fluked at me and Dad driving home. We were birding in Dundalk, and we were driving home. It was probably maybe 5:30, 6 in the evening, and barn owl flew across the road, and it landed on a telephone wire. And Dad positioned the car with the lights just aiming straight at it, and it just literally just sat there for ages. And then a car came along and spooked us. But
deadly.
Unbelievable, like how to see your first barn owl actually perch.
Yeah.
So. And I just Irish barn owls aren't, well, I don't know about maybe on breeding sites or that, but they don't. I know in Britain they come out in the daytime.
Yeah,
I think it's different. To do a competition from tawny owls or something. But in Ireland it's pretty much strictly nighttime that you see them.
Yeah, I've seen one barn owl during the day, and it was a sick bird.
Yeah. Well, I saw a day roosting bird to Cumshin, but
yeah, was that not? That's the sick bird, was it not? No, was it not sick?
I don't think that was sick, was it?
In the hedge.
Yeah.
I could have swore I heard that was sick and died, actually. But anyway, I saw my first one in a very, very
that's news to me, John.
Peter would overcut the bush it was in down, and it was trapped down underneath it. No, I saw my first one in a really unsatisfying way. It was on a motorway. It flew across the road. I had it for the grand total of 5 seconds, if that. And I was delighted with it. I was delighted. I was incredibly excited. The journey went incredibly quickly. I took barn owl and pallet harrier in the same day, folks. But that was a very, very unsatisfying view of one for me. I've since made a point of going to, there's a couple of nice areas in around Dublin for barn owl, and I've went there, I've camped out and spent time looking for them and got really good prolonged views since. But yeah, that's how I ticked it. The last owl,
the best,
the rarest owl, the rarest owl. Go on, tell the story of the Scops, Brian. I'll let you tell the story.
Well, right. So it was 16th of May 2019. So last May. Well, May of last year. I had an exam on the 17th of May, which I hadn't studied for at all, and I had
I'm shocked.
And I had planned to spend the whole 16th that day of just cramming everything, and I just saw it was posted into the Rare and Scarce group on Facebook, and I went in, just clicked into it. This is like 5 minutes before I had planned the study, and I clicked in, and it was a video of a singing Scops owl, and
do your impression.
That's bang on. But yeah, so I was really thinking, Jesus, I kind of, one part of me really hopes this is twitchable, and one part of me hopes it's really not, because I was kind of panicking that I wasn't going to get my my adequate studying done, and I was going to make an absolute bottle of the exam. But it turned out an hour later we were pretty much on the road. So we went down hoping to we went down early enough to try to see could we get a day roosting. But it was a proper needle in a haystack. Time just kept going on and on, and it was getting dark, and we were kind of just all listening, and nothing was happening. And about 10:30 or 11:15 maybe at night, I think John, you and Vic were the first to hear it, were you, sir?
I think so, yeah.
You, Vic, and Brian Porter or something like that. You were up further up the road.
I think Brian was. So there was a car park, which was a field that it was really dry. We all parked our cars in. Victor and I were there trying to scan from the back. And I think we heard it. I think Vic picked it up first. We heard it. We walked around, and Brian Porter was kind of the other side of those trees, and he was like, I can hear it. And then that was the beginning of a prolonged singing session. Like
unreal, yeah.
You like it sang for 5 hours. I don't know, a long time anyway. On and off for
it probably sang solidly for maybe 2 hours. And then it went quiet, didn't it?
Yeah.
Because,
well, when you say it went quiet, it was still giving the occasional call. Like
but it was kind of, you could tell it was like moving around a massive area.
Yeah.
Because it'd give a faint call on your right, and then like 2 minutes later it'd be calling your left, and you just know it's after flying over you, but you couldn't see it.
Yeah.
But
it was actually that was probably like, I'm not sure you could really like describe any twitch in Irish history as coordinated, but that was as close to a coordinated twitch as I've ever seen in Ireland.
Yeah.
So the birds started to...
That was the most like...
Yeah. The bird started to sing, right? We kind of ran around. You heard it then, and it was coming from the other side of the field, right? And you pretty much chucked your scope and started to climb over a fence, like, right? In the dark, you hadn't a clue where you were going, and you couldn't see more than 5 feet in front of your face, like. And I was like, "What are you doing? Would you slow down? Wait." And I goes, "You're going to take off running across a field in the dark. You're going to break your leg if, And we kind of cooler heads prevailed anyway, and everybody there must have been maybe 30 people there.
Did exactly what I was going to do.
No. A couple tried, but as I said, cooler heads prevailed. We opened the gate into the field. Everybody walked in, closed the gate again, and then we slowly walked across the field, all of us, right? And there was a very, very lucky little bit of moonlight that night.
It was a full moon, and it was literally like shining right down on this one oak tree
in the middle of the field. One tree in the middle of the field.
One single oak tree,
Yeah. And we crept up. And next thing, the bird flew into the moonlight. And it flew left, I think, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
I got like maybe 3 to 4 second flight view of it, and the majority of lads there got semi-decent views. Am I right? It was one particular individual, and I'm going to circle back to him. I have to tell the story because I feel terrible about it. But yeah, almost everybody there got quite a decent view of it at that point, and we were incredibly happy.
It wasn't even a decent view. It was...
Well...
It was a silhouette. It was a silhouette for about 3 seconds, 2 or 3 seconds max, if even. Like,
it was okay. I was happy with it. If I hadn't seen it again, it wasn't a binge
view either. It was like
we were surprisingly close to it.
Yeah, we were. Yeah.
I tell you, if I hadn't seen it again, I'd have been a happy man because I didn't expect to see it.
True, neither did I. I was.
Yeah, but one of the things that had happened is there's a birder here who's a very good friend of ours, and he's one of the nicest men you could meet in the world. Like, and since I started birding, he's been nothing but nice to me and always kind of helped me and stuff like that. His name's Aidan Kelly, and Aidan had the misfortune of standing behind me as we walked up for the bird. And guys, I don't know if this webcam is getting it in, but I'm not what you would call a small person by any stretch of the imagination. Certainly not. And Aidan, I blocked that bird for Aidan. He could not see past me, and it looked like for maybe an hour or two after that he wasn't going to get the bird, and I felt incredibly guilty. Thank God he actually, I don't think he got it that night, but he didn't
get it that night. No, he went back the next, and he did see it. Yeah,
which was a relief because I everybody else kind of calmed down a little bit, but I kept traipsing and trying to get close to the bird because I felt.
And then you saw it again in flight.
I saw it great. So it flew across the road under a street lamp and into this old derelict house on the right hand side. I got a great view of it there as well. And it was behind me again. And now he was looking the other way, but he was behind. I nearly didn't want to tell him that I'd seen it again. But as I said, the guilt kind of lifted when I heard that he had seen it, but up to that I was feeling terrible. Sidebar, that's the sidebar over. What happened next, Brian?
Yeah, so like the bird kind of stopped calling or stopped singing, and an awful lot of people just decided to leave. Like, fair enough, like it was getting quite late. But Peter, I think you had finished work at 9 or something, or what was it? Or...
Yeah, well, I was at home when I heard the news, and I put the kids to bed, and I think it was 10 o'clock when I left. So by the time I got down there, I think it was 12:30, going on for 1.
Yeah.
And you'd been giving me updates saying, yeah, the bird had been calling. I said, that's great. So eventually got there, and of course, bird hadn't been calling. Everyone had disappeared. There was about 8 people left. And I was still fairly optimistic, you know. You have to do.
In fact, Peter, that was it, because you weren't there. That's why we hung on.
Yeah,
we weren't going to leave you to try and find your own, late, like Peter. You know. So, well, thanks for being late, Peter, because it resulted in us probably getting some of the best views of anybody in the country of them.
Yeah.
But anyway, keep going. Sorry, Peter.
But so anyway, the lads were in the field, and I said, sure, I'll have a walk down the road here. It was kind of moonlit, so I said I'd walk down and see if I could really find the bird. And I came back a few minutes later, and I think someone had heard it calling.
I heard it calling, yeah.
Yeah, so I still hadn't heard it at this stage, and then someone else heard it calling, and I hadn't heard it. I thought this is just going to be complete disaster.
My old ears, you were thinking.
Yeah, my old ears. I just couldn't pick up the noise. All I'd hear is, there it is, you hear it? And I'm like, no, I didn't hear that. So we kept wandering around the field margins, and someone would say they heard it, and then someone would say, oh, I heard it 200 yards away, and we were wandering around for ages. And then we had the best bit of luck ever. Brian, you tell me.
It basically like it just flew out and landed in a well-lit area for about 20 seconds.
Why was the area well lit, Brian?
Fuck off, John.
No, so look, let's tell it what we were all.
No, you tell it, John. You tell it.
We were walking back to the car, right? You're all probably familiar with friend of the show, longtime friend of the show, Ger, the lamper.
Oh, Jesus Christ. John, you can't.
Ger was walking through the field with me beside him with his headlamp on him. The bird flew through his headlamp. He turned his head, and we followed the bird in the light until it roosted underneath a flipping lamppost beside this real like Art Deco house in the area. We were very, very lucky to see it. It was not intentional. We were walking to the car.
Yeah, fair,
like,
yeah.
You know, I don't think people can get too annoyed by that. It was in a red light. It was in a low intensity red light on his headlamp.
I know, but the bird was only about 15 or 20 feet away. Like,
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It was unbelievable views.
Yeah, and the area that it roosted in underneath it was like one of those kind of, you know, those garden lights that kind of shine the light kind of directly down. They're not exactly a street light, but they're very powerful. It kind of roosted just to the left of one of those, and we saw it in the open for maybe 5 to 10 seconds.
I'd say it was probably even longer.
The ear tufts. You could tell it were colour morph.
It was a grey morph.
The grey morph. Unbelievable.
We were very, very lucky at it. Very, very lucky.
That is definitely, it's one of the best birds on my Irish list by a mile.
Yeah.
Not even like that was the 16th Irish record, but it's not even. It was just the whole experience of like a singing male scops out in the Irish Midlands.
One you never thought.
Such good views.
Yeah.
Probably will like.
Be lucky to see one again.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Lucky,
and it was such a mega unblocker, like.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, you never seen such a happier group of lads. Like they were all smiling, hugging each other.
Yeah, put the picture in of us. Yeah,
I got the camera out. I said, lads, I have to get a picture of this. So I took a photograph of the group. I never seen such happy twitchers.
Yeah, it was fantastic. I couldn't believe
it.
And
then we got back to Dublin. I think I. And the next morning I got up pretty much 7 o'clock and my exam was at 2, and I managed to cram the entire semester into 5 hours pretty much,
Jesus.
and I passed.
Oh, fair play to you.
Yeah,
so
it
was
all worked out
unbelievable.
for the best. Now it's one I'll never forget. It was great crack.
Unreal.
And actually, was that the first time we all three of us took the bird together?
Possibly, yeah.
Yeah, it probably is. Yeah.
You can blame that Scop style for it all, folks. So look, for better or worse, that's our trip down memory lane, folks. We've discussed the rare owl times. I thought of that, so I'm going to plug it as much as possible. Again, thank you very, very much for your support. We're listening to your feedback. We're taking everything on board. We're trying to shorten down the episodes, keep them in around the hour mark or slightly below. We're listening to what you're saying, taking it on board, as I said. And I'm going to speak for everybody here and say that we're incredibly grateful for the outpouring of support that we've received. Thanks for watching. Please continue to do so. We'll continue to pump out the content. Remember to like, share, and subscribe. Specifically, subscribe to the YouTube channel because that helps us out a lot. And if we get sufficient numbers, it'll benefit everybody. That's all I'll say. But we really, really appreciate everything you're doing for us. And thanks again, folks. We'll see you in the next one.
Yeah.